I'm the founder of a company called Nova. They're a technology recruitment company that partners with startups and scale-ups and essentially builds their teams.
And how many resumes and profiles on LinkedIn do you think you've read over your career?
Yeah, I've seen thousands upon thousands of resumes and LinkedIn profiles.
So I think we can call you an expert in the field, right?
Yeah, well, if you want to, yeah.
Let's go through some of the results, shall we? This was your level of accuracy in terms of picking human accurately versus picking an LLM output. You were about, what was that, 75%, let's say, accurate for detecting human, and that might be about 40%-ish for LLMs.
Wow.
So it seems like you were able to pick human a lot more consistently, but LLMs look like, more than 50% of the time, just over, it was able to fool you into thinking a human wrote it. What do you think of that?
Doesn't surprise me, to be honest. They're getting really good. What I really want to know is what sort of prompts and how much was there back and forth to change the language and stuff like that, right? There was a few I could have went either way, to be honest with you, mate. There was a few I'm like,
right,
I'm pretty sure this is an LLM, but I'm going to put a human, or vice versa. But I think what this tells you is there is still a real genuine quality to a human touching it. Even if an LLM then adjusts it and fixes it, it needs to have a human element to have that kind of impact, right? And it's not something you can, I don't think, measure. It's a feeling. When you read something a human wrote, it strikes a chord, I think, in a different way.
I was thinking what we could do just very quickly is go through some of the things that you scored highly. This one you gave an 8 out of 10. It was generated by an LLM and you guessed it was a human. So this was generated by ChatGPT 3.5.
Wow.
What was interesting about this paragraph is that the prompt, the engineer had written dot points about their skill set. So this professional skill set, dot points, these are lifted from what a human has written about themselves. And then I added this paragraph at the top to ask ChatGPT, hey, this part here, actually. So this part from here onwards, that was like, okay, ChatGPT, give me a paragraph for my resume. This was one that you gave an 8 out of 10 for. Now, I would say, because it was a very detailed prompt, it was a one-shot prompt, but it had a lot of detail in it. So I guess ChatGPT's probably worked better with comprehensive detail. What did you think of this paragraph? What was attractive to you? Why did you give it an 8, do you think?
I think just it hit all the key points. It was written well. Spoke about the technologies like very much upfront on the resume, so you don't really need to read too much to know where they specialise and what particular areas they specialise in. Building high quality software. They hit a lot of points in a short space of time and made it really relevant to the roles that they're going to be applying to. So you know exactly what it is when you read it. But also at this point in time, I'd looked at about 50. So it was such an interesting thing to do. By the way, it was really cool because I was second guessing myself and I was trying not to overthink it. So I'm like, that's really well written, but I'm sure it's AI that's written it. But it could be a human, and then I just went with human. But it was interesting. I just thought it hit the key points and really gets across exactly who the person is.
It's good to have a score for how you interpreted the paragraph or how effective you thought it was, because I think it's a great learning for engineers to understand how a recruiter views them, or what does good look like. So I think it's actually quite good that we did scoring for this, because I think that's quite a useful thing for people. So this was written by a human. I would say it has probably maybe a similar level of detail. You guessed it was a human as well, so you guessed correctly. What about this do you think stuck out to you as to why it was most likely written by a human?
Well, obviously there's the obvious part, which is like the way it's written in terms of like I am. But for me, it was more, I don't know, it just felt more human. I don't know how to explain it. It's just like a reaction when I read it. I was like, that sounds to me like someone sat down and wrote that. It doesn't really sound like an LLM has touched it. The other thing as well is just like it goes into the technologies, which is great, but it humanizes the person a lot and kind of shows the areas that they really enjoy about their role and how they want to kind of help others and learn from people and stuff. So it just felt to me a lot more human. And if a hiring manager read that, it kind of speaks to them on a different level from just I have the tech stack experience and it's all laid out really nicely.
I noticed that some of the LLM content has things, it does things well in terms of position, using words and adjectives that kind of talk to action and like I'm doing this, I'm doing that, which is good. This style of writing seems to have maybe more, it seems more personal. Like I think it reads more personal, which is probably what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely.
And maybe calling out things that they enjoy and their goals and things like that. That's probably something like at the bottom here where it says, I enjoy working as a part of a team, teaching, listening, and learning from my colleagues. That doesn't sound very action orientated. That's more like this is just a reflection on who I am sort of thing, which is probably unlikely to come from an LLM.
Totally. And also it doesn't just say I'm a team player. It's like specific, right? And it isn't like I like to work in a team. It's like I actually like to help people and I like to learn from people too. That kind of tells you quite a lot about the person and the kind of culture fit and what they're kind of all about before you've even read any more of their resume. The other thing I would say too with the LLMs, I think it's really about what you put in first. So a great prompt, obviously, and the knowledge base is important, but if you put that through an LLM now and gave it multiple prompts on keeping the personal aspect, it would probably take it to another level. But as a one-shot prompt, I think it's a lot easier to spot.
They were the two highest ones you scored. So yeah, it's quite interesting. So this is a median score that you gave for humans and compared to different AI models, basically LLM models. It looks like you gave the highest scores to ChatGPT 3.5 and 4,
Wow.
which is interesting. And Claude Sonnet versions were second, so 3.0 and 3.5, followed by, I guess, ChatGPT 4.0, and then Gemini and Mixtral were the bottom. But human is interesting. You didn't score human as high in terms of quality or like effectiveness or like whatever. I guess this is your subjective scale, right? I guess of what does good look like. But it's interesting to see how you scored LLMs versus the human. What do you think of that?
That surprises me.
I guess with a lot of the human ones, you didn't know whether it was human or LLM when you gave the score, right? You're just giving it a guess. I think this is human. I think this is LLM. But this is just comparing how you scored different sources.
That actually makes sense because I think with some of the human ones, right, without looking at them again, they were short. They were shorter. They lacked a bit of detail. They lacked a bit of punch, but they felt a bit more human. They felt a bit messier and scrappier. The ones that I scored higher were like not just written well, but had all the tech stuff and had like their experience up front. But it was, that's interesting, man. I don't think they necessarily correlate. And what I mean by that is the fact that the human wrote it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get a much higher score for effectiveness, but it will get a much higher score for authenticity.
So this is looking at how you scored the results based upon the prompt complexity. So the way that I did prompt complexity was basically a one-shot prompt without anything else. So it was just give me this, here's some detail of what I want. I gave it 3 levels of detail. One was a very minimal input, one was a mid-level input, and one was quite detailed. The detailed inputs were usually a human had already written about themselves, and I provided that in, say, dot points, which you saw the example previously, provided dot points to the LLM to get an output. The 2-shot prompts were where I asked for an adjustment. I just gave it its first level of detail in its first shot. In the second shot, I just asked for an adjustment to language. This was kind of interesting because I can't really see correlation between the blank one, I think, are human responses, so you can ignore that. There's doesn't seem to be correlation with more detailed input having a higher score, because one-shot minimal input gave the same median score as a detailed input. It's been good, Kris. I think, is there anything else you wanted to go through? I don't know if you can remember the ones you wanted to touch on to know for sure.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, there was one that there was a girl who got into Code Girl camp or something.
Oh, yeah,
I'd really like to know about that one.
Yeah, that was human.
Human, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you wonder about whether this was LLM or not?
I was pretty sure it was a human, but I wondered if there had been any involvement at all, or if it was just someone that had just wrote it.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm intrigued to ask you, what do you think about, because I know that you are a lot more on the person and the soft skills and the capability and the development and the softer elements and not just the tech stack.
Yeah.
But what do you resonate towards a good profile? What stands out to you?
I think you can have a paragraph that says, I know how to do JavaScript, let's say, right?
Yeah.
So I can code in JavaScript. The thing with that is that if you have let's say you have a front-end engineer advertisement or a job, right? And everybody applying is going to be, oh yeah, I can code in JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
But so that doesn't tell me anything. It kind of sets a baseline, but I think it's assumed, or it's much better, I think, to start with the point of, well, it's assumed to a degree that everyone that I know JavaScript, right? And maybe it's a dot point or a very small thing that's added, but it shouldn't be everything. Instead, I think I'm interested in how somebody thinks about problem solving, how they think about engineering practices. I think personalized things, like this is kind of interesting looking at somebody's biography, I guess, like how they started. It's very personal, I think, a lot of this, because it talks about, I'm a mother. I learned to code in this time frame. This is how it happened. That's interesting. And I think that's fine. That's okay. Because I think in interviews, I would probably ask them questions about it. Like, you learned to code here. Like, tell me about it. Like, you've given me a little bit of insight, but tell me about what was good about it, what was hard, what was, how have you grown since then, kind of thing. And so I think if resumes are setting up those kinds of things where, this is a good starting point for conversation, I think that's good. But I'm really looking for the differences between JavaScript engineers, let's say, right? And I'm looking for how they think about problems. Do they connect what they're working on to the business value or the customer value? And is that demonstrated in how they talk about their work? Because I think in resumes, I don't put too much in resumes. There's not too much value I put into it. But one thing that is valuable is when people are not just saying, I worked on the billing project, which was using JavaScript and TypeScript and that kind of thing. That is pretty low value. I think instead, if someone says, I worked on this billing project that was designed to deliver customer invoices within 4 hours instead of 12, I'd be like, okay. Like someone understood the project is not just about the technology. The project is actually about some business need where it's like this 12-hour time frame to get an invoice out is problematic and we need to make it faster. And so I think it's important that software engineers have that mindset about their work. They understand where the value is and what they're driving towards, because all of their decisions that they have to make about the technical solution should be in line with achieving that goal. If it's not, then you could just have fun building something technical, but it could be the wrong thing because you don't have the right context or thinking about what problem actually needs to be solved. You come up with better solutions, I think. So that's kind of what I'm looking for.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the responsibilities aspect, obviously it's important because from an ATS point of view, you want to have the key things on there.
Yep.
But the only thing I would add from what you've said is some evidence on there too around whether it be a business strategy, objective, something the business is working on. So if you're saying we worked on X, Y, and Z and it reduced this, or it helped around this, or it reduced this problem, and the evidence was X, Y, and Z, and something that's really effective is some feedback or something that you've received from a third person. Like, so not your opinion, right?
Sure.
So like saying, I did this, I did that, could be like, we achieved this from an objective point of view, and then a little quote, here's the feedback that we received from X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
Or this played into the overall goal for the business to, I don't know, grow customers by X amount. And I think what that does is it makes your resume a lot more accessible, because what you've got to think about is a lot of people that are reading the resume might not be engineers.
Yep. And I think the LLMs, they can't give that personal context in a response unless you give it as a prompt specifically, which might work fine. But that has to come from you. If you have an LLM make adjustments to it, fine. But the actual story of like who you are, what you've done, the context and how you think about things and what's important to you, like that has to come from you, right? LLMs are not just going to create that out of thin air, most likely.
Think about it like a coding problem, right? You're starting it and then you're using like a little co-pilot to help you. I think that's where a lot of it's going. So it's like, these are the things I care about. This is why, because a lot of, not a lot, but some folks might not know how to articulate that on a resume, and they might be phenomenal engineers, but they just don't know how to put that down on paper, right? So they might be missing opportunities because of it. And I think this is where you come in, being able to coach them, because it isn't just your opinion of what you think is good or valuable. It's like looking at the job description, understanding what are they looking for, what language are they using, and then a really smart prompt on the resume and on the job description, help me tailor this in a natural way. It's got to come from you, but then using the LLM to help you tailor some of these specific points. Again, you're just like singing to the person that reads the resume, right? You're making their life so much easier, particularly if they're non-technical. They read your resume and that speaks to them in a level that not a lot of other resumes do. You're going to get your foot in the door, and that's really all you want. It's like, it's a ticket to the dance, right? You need a ticket to go there, and then you can show all your skills and what makes you different and stuff. But I think from reading a lot of resumes, the ones that are a lot more technical, they'll only really resonate with a certain amount of people. I think if we could get a lot more in the like human and personal touch, I think that would help.
Yeah.
I think that would help quite a lot when it comes to like even being approached for jobs, Dan. Like if someone looks at someone's background on their LinkedIn, it's got a little bit about their life, what they're all about, the type of engineer they are, type of product manager, some recommendations from people they've worked with. Super, super important. Some like social proof. That is way more effective and important than having a perfect resume. And I think it will become more and more important too as LLMs start becoming even stronger and even better. Is like social proof, LinkedIn references, all of this stuff is actually going to be even more important, because we're not going to be able to, as you can see from the data, we're not going to be able to tell if it's actually been written by someone or it's been written by an LLM. And that's a problem when it comes to accuracy. That's a problem when it comes to competency, right? Do they actually have these skills, and how do you effectively prove that? I think is probably the main thing is ensuring that it's not just made up.
Well, with minimal prompts, the LLMs did insert things that weren't in the prompt based on the context, because the minimal prompt only said I need a paragraph for my resume, and there were different varying themes around how that was written to see if different responses would be given, and a list of skills, technical skills. That was mostly what the minimal prompts were about. That's as simple as they got. There was no further information. But in the output, there were plenty of outputs that actually said, I like working in an agile environment, say, for example, right? Or I have focus on the customer or something like that. The LLM not hallucinated, because it might well be true and it's in context, and but the LLM inserted that off its own bat. And that's quite interesting, I suppose. That's not like a flavor of engineer that you've decided you are, or the things that are important to you. That's something that LLM has inserted. Now, it could still well be true, but I think a lot of the problems with the LLM output is that a lot of those additions were similar. So I guess it was easier for me to identify that, probably because I could see which ones were generated by LLM. So I'm already biased because I'm looking at the output and going, oh, that's very similar to this other LLM output. But you couldn't know that on your side because you didn't know which ones were generated by LLMs and which one were human. It is interesting that the flavors that the LLM adds were kind of generic, were kind of non-specific, I guess. They were specific to a developer's job, which is the context of what the prompt was about. But it certainly didn't ring very personal, I guess, about the candidate or what particularly mattered to them. So there's one thing I wanted to ask you, the last bit to cover. You sent me a message about one of the outputs. What was it?
I know what one you're talking about.
I have a strong aversion to developers who don't know what they're doing. So let's have a look at that. Let's do a search for it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you asked me whether I wrote this, I think. Was that right?
Can't remember. I think so, yeah. I think I asked you.
You had a bit of a laugh about it.
I just thought, what a way to... it's just never a good idea putting that in a profile, right? Even though it's true and you might agree with it, it just has no tone. And it's like, it made me laugh. It made me laugh a lot.
So this was an experiment, a little sprinkle of something I added into the mix. You scored this as human, but it's actually from an LLM. Now, interestingly enough, though, the prompt, if you have a look over here, the prompt was, write me a bio section of a resume, pretty standard. I'm a software engineer with X number of skills, and these are my skills. I dislike JavaScript and developers who don't know what they're doing. Right? Now, there was a bit of a joke, but I tried it. I tried similar language in a few different LLMs, right? And the ones that are known for having more safety, I guess, more guardrails, some of them refused to use that. If I used passive-aggressive language, so I tried a couple of experiments. One or two prompts had passive-aggressive language. Some had outright negative language. And I put that in to see how the response would go. So Mixtral, interestingly, Mixtral did not, just took it as is and was like, yeah, sure. and added it into the mix, right? So that was quite interesting. And I guess, if I suppose if that's what you want to make sure that your sentiments are properly represented, then you probably need an LLM without the safety element, or less of the safety element, right? Yeah. If it's useful to take those things away, which in most contexts it might be, in this context at least probably is, because having lots of positives is going to be a lot better vibe that a recruiter's getting. You probably want to make sure you're using an LLM that has more safety built in. But I thought that was kind of fun to put that in and see how the LLM would respond, whether it would let me actually put something passive-aggressive or negative into my bio. It seems to be from your question when you were laughing about it and you sent me a message about it, it seems to be that your understanding was, well, a human probably wrote this because it's very human-like, I suppose, to have a negativity, passive-aggressive maybe type of writing, right? You probably maybe expected that an LLM wouldn't do that for you. Would that be right?
It was definitely the aversion to JavaScript and developers who don't know what they're doing. The reason I thought it was a human is, and I might have been overthinking this, but I thought if I use an LLM to get me an outcome, i.e. to get me an interview, that LLM is not going to put anything negative in a paragraph that would affect me getting the job.
Right.
So I thought it must have been a human. But it's...
So for some of the LLMs like ChatGPT, it actually said to me, Well, it's probably not good to put a negative in this paragraph, so I'm going to take it out for you. I'm going to ignore
Well, that's
that
good,
part.
right?
Yeah, it can be useful. I mean, it can definitely be useful if there's a risk, maybe, say if somebody's in a job where they're very stressed out and they really need to find something, or they're having trouble finding something and they're emotionally in a state. In those, if you're in that kind of position, I guess, and you don't trust that what you're writing is going to be received well, or there's a potential for that, then probably using an LLM with the safety element, it's probably a good idea. It's probably a good idea.
Do you know what I think? And I know this sounds super basic, but it catches you out a bit when it says "I am" all the time too. You
Right.
automatically start. I don't know. It feels a bit more like someone wrote it rather than an LLM.
Well, interesting you're talking about the I am phrasing. I think different LLMs did it differently. Like Claude here didn't write any I am stuff, even though my prompt had a lot of I ams in it. The output didn't have any. It was just kind of, a skilled Java Kotlin software engineer. But this,
That's kind of best practice, right?
yeah, I guess so. But it does take away you guessed correctly, this was an LLM. And it does take the humanness out of it, I think, when it's written in that form, in that style. Even if you wanted to make it a bit more, maybe it's a way people think, it's a bit more professional. But it does take a little bit of human element out of it, I suppose. Well, thanks, Kris, mate. There's some awesome tips there, and awesome. I think it was really interesting to see how the LLM scored against humans according to you, how you rated them, what was important to you. I think there's some great tips there for people to understand, how to write their resume better, how to make their LinkedIn profile better, increase the odds of getting kind of a really good job that they're interested in and really keen on. So it was awesome, mate. Awesome tips for people.
Awesome, mate. Well, thank you.
All good. Thanks, Kris.
Cheers.